The first truck came up the gravel lane a little after 7 on a raw morning in the fall of 2018, its bed already tilting as it swung wide at the edge of the backfield. It did not stop at the house. Hydraulics groaned over the diesel, the tailgate banged open, and a load of broken blue-gray stone slid off in a long, grinding roar. Flat slabs and jagged rubble and a pale plume of rock dust, cracking against itself and settling over the frosted grass. The driver never got down from the cab. Before noon, a second truck came, and after it a third, and by mid-afternoon, 3 heaped ridges of waste stone stood along the fence line of a farm the county had given up on. It was leavings from Blackford Stone, the big bluestone quarry over on the county line, the off-size flag too short for a contract, the slabs split wrong, the blocky rubble, the fine grit swept off the sizing decks. For such a quarry, only a small part of the stone ever leaves as squared block. The rest is waste, and there were mountains of it. Years back, the quarry had shaken hands with the old man who farmed this place, tipped the stone on his back field, shore up his lane and his pond dam for free, save everybody the hauling, and no one had thought to cancel it. Now the quarry's own spoil ground had filled and the transfer station charged by the ton, so the free field was simply the cheapest place left. Cars slowed on the county road to look at the gray heaps and saw one more indignity for a piece of ground the township agreed was finished. But the old man's granddaughter stood at the fence with a mug of coffee going cold in her hand, and the question behind her eyes was not the one the drivers would have guessed if the only thing wrong with this stone was that it was in the quarry's way. Why was the quarry paying good money to make it disappear? Her name was Ada Whitlock, and she was 52 that autumn. The farm was 34 acres in the bluestone hill country of northeastern Pennsylvania, her grandfather's ground, where she had spent the summers of her youth before a working life carried her 200 miles away. For nearly 30 years, she had been a materials testing technician, breaking test cylinders, sieving stone into its grades, reading whether a rock was sound or would fail, until the lab was folded into a distant office and her job with it. The farm her grandfather had signed over to her years before was the one place she had left to go. She came home to a sagging barn roof, a tractor seized to rust, 2 seasons of back taxes, and the gentle, unanimous advice of nearly everyone she met: sell it and be done. Quick pause, right here near the start. If stories like this one keep finding their way to you, this channel is probably worth sticking around for. Go ahead and subscribe. And do one small thing for me while you're here. Tell me where you're watching from tonight down in the comments. I read every single one. Now back to the story. The advice was kind, and it was not exactly wrong. The man from the county who came to value the place walked it that spring and said out loud what everyone already believed. The ground was thin and stony, the back acres more rock than soil, and nobody made 34 hill acres pay anymore. The bank said the same in colder words. Written off, that was the phrase living underneath all of it, the one nobody said to her face. The land was written off, and so, she understood plainly enough, was the 52-year-old woman standing on it with no work, no marriage any longer, and no notion of how to run a tractor. She had been home 8 months when the trucks came, and she had spent most of those months deciding whether the whole county was right about her. The morning after the third truck, before the sun had cleared the ridge, Ada walked out to the heaps with a spiral notebook, a 2-pound hammer, and a hand lens she had carried in a coat pocket for 20 years. She did not call the quarry, and she did not call a lawyer. Her hands knew the work before her head caught up. She knelt at the base of the nearest ridge, turned a flat slab over, and read it the way the lab had taught her, the fine, even grain of good bluestone, the clean bedding a mason could split along, the ring of a soundstone when she tapped it. She set a chisel to a seam, gave it 2 taps, and the slab opened into 2 clean flags the color of a storm sky. This was not rubbish. It was flagstone, patio and walkway stone, the same blue-gray flag a landscape yard sold by the ton for more than she wanted to say aloud, dumped free at her fence line by people paying to be rid of it. Then the technician took over. One ridge might hold a few hundred square feet of good flag, and there were 3 of them with more promised. She underlined a figure, went inside, and called Blackford Stone not to complain, to ask when the next load was coming, and to keep the soft gray shale out of it. What she learned that first winter she mostly learned the hard way, and the first lesson was that stone, which looks alike, is not alike. Bluestone splits clean along its bedding, but drive a chisel across the grain and a good slab shatters to gravel. Her earliest tries left as much broken waste as finished flag until her hands remembered to read the seam and work with it, never against. The second lesson cost more. She sold a load of handsome flag to a man laying a patio, and over the first hard freeze a third of it flaked and lifted apart, because some of those slabs were the punky, thirsty kind that soak up water and burst when it turns to ice, the very failure she had tested 1,000 times in the lab and had let her hurry override. She drove back, replaced every flag herself, and swallowed the cost. After that, she built a rough test into the work. The slabs that rang clear and shed water went to the pallets. The ones that drank and thudded dull went to the rubble heap for crushing, and never into a customer's ground. A woman from the county had already walked her through the rest. The weight tickets, the sales tax number, the license she would need before she built walls on other people's land, and the pity in town had settled a little deeper. The man who could shorten her education by 2 years lived in a stone house he had built himself across the valley, his tools rusting under a lean to behind it. Silas Renner had laid stone for better than 30 years. Walls, walks, chimneys, the patient dry stack work that holds a hillside without a drop of mortar, until his knees gave out and the trade moved on without him. He was 73, deaf in one ear, and built like a man who had carried flat rock his whole life. Ada drove out, laid it before him, and waited through a silence long enough to doubt herself twice. Then Silas walked her out back, pulled a tarp off a hydraulic splitter, a bucket of feathers and wedges, and an old screening deck, and sold her all of it for scrap, on the one condition that she never waste them. What came with the iron was worth more than the iron. Read the seam before you ever swing, he told her. The stone will tell you where it wants to break. Split with the grain and it does half your work, and lay a wall to tie and to drain, every stone across the joint beneath it, the face battered back into the hill, the water given somewhere to go. Or the first hard frost will heave it into your lap by spring. She wrote it all down. He watched her write and said only that most people who came to him wanting stone wanted it easy, and that she would do. Her first real wall nearly ended the whole thing. A man up the road hired her to build a dry stone wall along his drive, her first true commission, and she wanted it so badly that she cut the corners a careful person never cuts, no proper footing, the face straight up instead of battered back, the stones laid fast and flat instead of tied across the joints. It stood beautifully for a month. Then the ground froze and thawed and froze again through a wet winter. The water she had given nowhere to go turned to ice behind the stone and pushed, and by the March mud, the whole middle of the wall had bellied out and slumped into the ditch. She looked at it a long while, letting herself believe, for one evening, that everyone in town had been right about her. The next morning she tore it to the ground, dug a proper drained footing of her own crushed stone, battered the face into the bank, tied every course the way Silas had told her, and built it again slower and right. It never moved again. And she made herself a rule as hard as any in the lab. Nothing she built or sold left the lane unless it would stand the frost, no matter how far behind the season had fallen. The turn in the whole business came out of the part she had been treating as garbage. Crushing the punky slabs and screening the flag left her with heaps of fine blue-gray stone dust and grit. The leavings of the leavings, hundreds of tons of it piling behind the barn. She had half decided to spread it on the lane and forget it when a landscaper who bought her flag asked whether she had any stone dust to sell. It was exactly what his crews wanted for setting and leveling flagstone, and he could never get it cheap. She sold him the first pile on the spot, astonished. Then a woman from a garden center worked a handful of the finest grit between her fingers and asked for a pallet. Gardeners paid steadily for sharp grit to open up heavy soil and drain their raised beds, and nobody local carried it. Silas, come by about a fitting on the splitter, took a handful of the dust, rubbed it, and gave her the 2 words worth more than a week of flag: sell that. She had been spending effort to be rid of the very thing 2 markets wanted. That winter she began screening the fines on purpose into 3 grades: coarse path stone, setting dust, and garden grit, and cast a first run of little garden troughs from the finest of it that sold off the farm stand before they had fully cured. The finishing touch, the thing that set her stone apart, came off her own written-off ground. The quarry's fresh split bluestone was clean and square, but it was raw. None of the gray lichen and weathered face that make a wall look as though it has always stood there. The back acres the appraiser had called more rock than soil were seeded with old fieldstone, generations of it, cleared by hand and piled along the lines by people long gone. Every piece capped with moss and weathered soft gray. She began working that fieldstone into the tops of her walls and selling it as age caps and hearthstone, the one thing money could hardly buy and every good landscaper wanted. The farm the whole county had written off was growing, out of its own written-off back acres, the exact ingredient the quarry with all its saws could never give away. The second full season was the grind, and the grind did not photograph. It was a used skid loader bought at auction so she could move a pallet of flag without wrecking her back. It was the screening deck rebuilt against the barn to grade the fines, a stormwater berm dug around the crushing pile to satisfy the county, and sample walls built along her own lane so a customer could see the work before he bought it. It was splitting flag on a Sunday, with her hands moving over the seam the way they had once moved over a testing bench. Through all of it, the trucks kept coming, and the town kept being gentle to her face. Then, one October afternoon, Silas Renner stood at the end of a 40-foot dry wall she had laid along the road frontage, sighted down its true battered face, leaned on it with his whole weight, and gave a single slow nod. "That'll lay," he said, the highest praise the man owned, and she got no farther than the barn before she had to sit down on a pallet a minute. The market found her the way it finds anyone whose thing is real, a little at a time, then all at once by word of mouth. Saturdays she sold flag and wall stone off the farm to weekend homeowners building their own patios, and before long the aged fieldstone caps the landscapers went a little foolish over. One who stopped was a foreman for a company that worked the lake houses up in the resort country. He bought every pallet of aged flag she had and called that Wednesday for a standing order. Stone men talked to stone men. By the next spring, she was filling weekly pallets for 2 landscape outfits and a masonry supply that ran to 4 counties, moving setting dust and path stone by the truckload. Garden grit through 3 garden centers who could not keep it on the floor, and the little cast troughs as fast as she could pour them. One dumped pile of waste stone was feeding 5 separate things now: flag, wall stone, path gravel, garden grit, and troughs, and not one could have existed without the leavings nobody else had wanted. By the fall of 2021, the third autumn, the trucks from Blackford Stone still turned up the gravel lane. But now, they called first. The quarry had worked out that its waste was worth something to somebody, and had quietly begun to protect the arrangement. Loads timed to her week. The soft shale screened out and the good flag kept in. And a spoken understanding that the waste stone came to the Whitlock place first. 2 people from town worked alongside her through the busy months, glad of the wage. The barn wore a new steel roof, paid for outright. The bank had stopped calling about the taxes. Ada Whitlock never once said a number out loud, and this story is not going to say one for her. She was raised to believe you keep your money to yourself. But the accountant who closed her books that winter gave her the plain shape of it. The farm the county had written off had just turned in its best year in 2 generations, and it had not been close. Cars still slowed on the county road. There was a neat stone yard sign at the end of the lane now, pallets of flags squared along the drive, and on Saturday mornings a line of trucks waiting to load. People ask her at the yard what the trick was, and she gives them the testing technician's answer. She looked closely at a thing everyone else had already written down as nothing. The quarry was not wrong that the stone was waste. It was waste to an operation built to cut squared stone fast and clear the leavings as cheaply as it could. The quarry had asked the stone one question: how do we be rid of you? And never heard the only answer that mattered. She had walked out to the fence and asked it something else. What are you good for? And the whole business, the pallets and the splitter and the screened grit and the aged fieldstone off her own back acres, was nothing more than that one different question, asked patiently, one slab at a time, for 3 years. Most opportunity does not arrive looking like opportunity. It arrives looking like a nuisance, a pile of rubble dumped at your fence line, a machine rusting under a tarp, a piece of ground the whole county has agreed to stop believing in. It comes to you already labeled as waste, because somebody bigger and busier decided it was not worth their while, which is the whole reason it is lying there for you to find. The stone was never junk. It was only ever in the wrong pile, waiting on somebody who would ask what it was for instead of how to be rid of it. Somewhere near you right now, there is almost certainly something written off. A field, a building, a skill, a person, waiting on somebody willing to look at it long enough to ask what nobody else bothered to. What is this actually good for? Sometimes the answer is nothing, and sometimes it is everything the people who dumped it could never see.